Okay, hi everybody. My name is Sherry Tuffin. I'm going to be talking to you tonight about the hidden stories of Belle Isle. To give you a little bit of background on who I am a tour director with the company called Travel with Nance. That's where I met Sharon. And one of the tours that Nancy does is a day tour that involves Belle Isle in the morning and then the DIA in the afternoon. So being a tour director, I wanted to know more about Belle Isle. And what I discovered was the more I learned, the better I liked Belle Isle. It is full of interesting and largely unknown things that people that have been born and raised in Detroit were surprised to learn. So I've taken 3 of the stories, the hidden stories that particularly appealed to me. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight, is the hidden stories of Belle Isle. So let's go right to the PowerPoint. Okay. Belle Isle is an island, for those who don't know. Belle Isle is an island in the Detroit River. When the French occupied Detroit,
You need to share your screen.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, share on Zoom.
I can't hear you.
Share your screen.
Oh, I'm still on mute.
No, you're not muted.
Oh, I'm not.
You need
Okay.
to share from Zoom.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I need to share screen.
Here, give it.
Only you guys get to see it.
This one.
There we go. Now the people at home can see it too. Can we reduce that?
Yep, that's what I was gonna do.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so for those who don't know, Belle Isle is an island in the Detroit River. When the French occupied Detroit, it was called Hog Island. The French farmers would take their hogs over to roam freely on the island, and that would deter thieves. They wouldn't have to guard them constantly. Now, Detroit, Belle Isle is 982 acres, and that's important. I want you to remember 982 acres because I'm going to come back to that later. Now, how did it get the name Belle Isle? In 1845, the Michigan Territorial Governor, Lewis Cass, he and his family had a picnic on the island. His daughter's name was Isabel, but the family called her Belle. So at the picnic, he named the island Belle Isle after his daughter. So that's how it got its name. Now, we're going to move along.
Where's that mouse at? All right, now try it.
There we go. We're working now. Okay, I'm going to tell you 3 hidden stories about Belle Isle. I'm going to tell you the story of the ugly soldier. I'm also going to tell you the story of the woman of experience, and I'll tell you about the man Detroiters hated. The first story I'm going to tell you is about the ugly soldier. At the intersection of Insalru and Central on Belle Isle is the first equestrian statue in Detroit. It's a statue of General Alpheus Starkey Williams. He was a Union general during the Civil War, and he's shown sitting on his horse reading a map. And this statue was done by Sherry. Sherry also did the Ulysses S. Grant Monument in Washington. And we see General Williams with his rain hat, his rain gear, looking at a map. His horse's head is down, the horse's tail is between his legs, and they look very weary. And Sherry wanted to portray the storm that was in the United States at the time. And they're trudging wearily through the mud. Now, who is Alpheus Starkey Williams? Well, he was a very prosperous man in Detroit. He was a probate judge. He was postmaster. He was the president of the Bank of St. Clara. He was the editor of the Detroit Advertiser newspaper, and somehow in his spare time, he was a lieutenant colonel in the 1st Michigan Infantry. He managed to stay pretty busy. Well, in 1861, Civil War broke out in the United States, and General Williams is made a brigadier general. Now, I told you I was going to tell you the story of the ugly soldier. Well, General Williams is kind of an average looking guy if you discard that mustache.
Oh,
It must have been in fashion at the time. That's all I can think. But he's a pretty average looking guy. So if I'm going to tell you the story of the ugly soldier and General Williams is kind of an average looking guy, well, let's go back to the statue. We see a rider and a horse. If General Williams is not the ugly soldier, that only leaves the horse. When General Williams joined the Union Army, he was given 2 horses, a show horse by the name of Yorkshire for parades, that sort of thing. He was also given a workhorse, and this horse is the one he used most of the time. And this horse's name, given to him by the Army, was Plug Ugly.
oh.
So if the horse is the ugly soldier, how do I tell the story of a horse? Horses can't talk. How am I going to tell you? Well, the good news is General Williams wrote a lot of letters home. And because of that, we learn the story of Plug Ugly. One of the first campaigns that General Williams and Plug Ugly fought in was the Battle of Winchester in 1862. And this is what General Williams wrote. Now, by the way, at the Battle of Winchester, that was the Union general was Nathaniel Banks and the Confederate general was Stonewall Jackson. The Union would lose this battle. But here's what General Williams wrote home. I was penned in by a heavy stone wall. I dashed to a point where 2 or 3 stones appeared to have been knocked off the top. And although Plug Ugly is a pretty heavy beast, I think he appreciated the occasion, for he cleared the wall most gallantly and carried me safely over. Later, General Williams and Plug Ugly were in the Battle of Chancellorsville. Now, this was the Union general leading the charge was General Hooker. The Confederate general was Robert E. Lee. This was Lee's greatest victory during the Civil War. And this is what General Williams wrote home. I was passing through a low, muddy spot when a shell stuck in the mud directly under Plug Ugly exploded, throwing up the mud like a volcano. I felt as if I was lifted 10 feet in the air and supposed, of course, old Plug Ugly was gone. I dismounted in haste and found he was bleeding pretty freely. But strange to say, he wasn't seriously wounded. It was probably a percussion shell which buried itself below the mud so deep and thus saved Plug and myself. Then we get to the Battle of Gettysburg. The Union general was General Meade, and the Confederate general was Robert E. Lee. This the Union would win, of course, and this is where the tide of the war turned. General Williams and Plug Ugly were in this battle, and here's what the general wrote home. Plug slipped and tumbled down the bank and landed flat on his back in the bottom of the ditch. Old Plug Ugly must have fallen 8 or 10 feet, and as he groaned hugely, I supposed he was finished at last. The men got his saddle off while he lay as quiet as a lamb, and turning him around with a big grunt, he got to his feet, and was apparently as sound as ever, although it was a lucky escape for man, beast, and saddle. Old Plug was somewhat stiff the next day, but I rode him every day. He's a regular old soldier. As we march along, he grabs at every knot of grass, corn, shrub, or any vegetable substance that presents itself. No amount of spurring or whipping can break him of this habit. For a year and a half, we have been daily companions. We get up a great love under these circumstances. I should grieve to part with Old Plug and all his faults. Okay, spoiler alert, you know this isn't going to end happily, right?
Oh,
Well, it isn't. So here we go to the final letter. This was worthy and war-torn Old Plug Ugly gave out last summer beyond even strength to be led and was sold for $50. I would cheerfully pay more for his bullet board skin if I had it. I hear he died soon after. Aw. That's the story of Plug. So sometimes when you look at a statue, you don't notice the horse, you notice the rider. But in this case, the horse has a story to tell too. And I think when you're on Belle Isle the next time, you're going to look at that statue quite differently. Well, that's what happened to Plug, but what happened to General Williams? Well, following the war, he was the ambassador or the American minister to San Salvador for 3 years. He was the American representative in San Salvador. Then he came back and he was a Democratic congressman from the Michigan 1st Congressional District. From 1875 to 1878, he served in Congress. On December 21st, 1878, General Williams suffered a stroke on the floor of the Capitol building and died. He is interred at Elmwood Cemetery, which is the oldest cemetery in Detroit. It's not far from Belle Isle, actually. And General Williams is buried in Elmwood Cemetery. So again, sometimes when you go through a cemetery, I'm always fascinated by cemetery art, but you would see this stone and not know the whole background. And that's what happens on Belle Isle. So now I'm going to tell you the hidden story of the woman of experience. On Belle Isle is the Nancy Brown Peace Carillon. For those who don't know what's a carillon, it's a fancy name for a bell tower. That's all it is. It's a set of bells in a tower that either are run mechanically or with a piano roll kind of thing. The carillon on Belle Isle is 85 feet tall. It cost $59,000 to build in 1936. Think about that. That's the Depression. $59,000. Today, that's the equivalent of about $925,000. But I go back to, this was during the Depression. So the architect was Clarence Day. There is an inscription. It says, dedicated to the glory of God and in the hope of everlasting peace between the peoples of the Dominion of Canada and the United States of America. This is the cornerstone, and this is what you can see it on the carillon. Okay, who was Nancy Brown? Has anyone here ever heard of Nancy Brown? You've all seen the carillon though, right? Yeah. Okay. Before Ann Landers, before Dear Abby, there was Nancy Brown. She had a column in the Detroit News called The Experience by Nancy Brown. Today, we have so many ways to connect with others. We have phones, cell phones, we have email, we have Twitter, we have Zoom, we have Skype, we can communicate all sorts of ways. But during 1920 to 1940, people didn't have phones in their homes. TV wasn't around yet. You used what we call today snail mail. You'd write a letter, stick a stamp on it, and send it. Well, that would take a few days for them to get and a few days to get back. People relied on in-home visits and letters. There weren't really a lot of ways to connect. So Nancy Brown's column dealt with a whole lot of things that people could talk about. They could talk about life. They could talk about death, morals, education, art, religion, literature, love. She even had consultants. She had a physician, a lawyer, and a sociologist to help her consult, because people would write to her and ask, this is happening, what do I do? This is happening in my life, how do I handle this? Well, some things were beyond her scope. Although I will tell you, she was not a sweet and sugary kind of woman. She certainly had her say. There was one girl, if you were 16 and you smoked in those days, you were considered fast. And the girl wrote to Nancy and said, my mother's very angry with me. She said, I'm losing my reputation because I smoke. Do you agree? And Nancy's response was, grow up, little girl, listen to your mother. So you could see, Betty Crocker, she was not. So here's a picture of Nancy Brown. And as you'll know, her back is turned to the camera. That's not an accident. She's in her office at the Detroit News. The editors of the Detroit News felt if she remained anonymous, it would add an element of mystery and would attract readers. Nancy felt being anonymous, she could walk among people and they would feel more inclined to share their stories with her. In my mind, it was kind of like in the Catholic Church, the confessional. It's easier to tell your story if you don't have to look at the person you're telling. So her readers never knew what she looked like, but they became very close to her. They felt like a family, and they called themselves columnites because they would write in. By the way, she never would allow one columnite to know the identity of the other. Sometimes people would write, say, oh, I think I know who, little Mary is. And she would say, I'm not talking about that. She wanted them to have the luxury of revealing their stories without finding out a neighbor recognized them. So she was anonymous, but she kept the columnites anonymous too. To give you an idea of the feeling of community, here are some of the actual things columnites wrote to her. Dearest Nancy and the column family. Again, that word family. I moved and feel I am a disconnected relative these days. One person wrote, I love all you columnites. Nancy, I love you for your lovely friendship. I know all of you, like all of you, and hope you'll let me be one of you. Dear Nancy, I've been away. Have you missed me? But they felt that connected. Seems I know the people who have written to you better than I do the people I see every day. I think even in later years where there was more ways to connect, I'll bet dear Abby and Ann Landers heard the same thing. Yeah. I keep my grief from my husband and my children, so you can hardly realize what it meant to unburden myself to you. So you can see this was an avenue where people could share. They wouldn't embarrass themselves in front of family and friends, and a letter just wasn't going to do the trick, So she was able to share. Again, remember, this is the Depression. In 1927, the Detroit Institute of Arts was built. For the first 3 years, they had very low attendance. And Nancy made a remark that, why don't you come out to the Detroit Institute of Arts and we'll have a party? Well, she'd wander around, they wouldn't know who she was, but we'll have a party. Well, at this point, even the Detroit News editors had no idea the power she could wield. So she encouraged her readers to come out.
Oh,
100,000 people appeared at the Detroit Institute of Arts. The editors at the News had no clue that Nancy Brown had gotten this powerful. In the Time magazine, 1936, Time magazine, they wrote an article about it. And here's the quote from Time magazine. Police estimated 100,000 people showed up. A Detroit News editor, William Gilmore, drove to the DIA for the party and found the streets for blocks around the Institute tightly packed with people. Summoning a traffic policeman, Mr. Gilmore inquired the reason. The cop told the news editor, hell, where you been? Mean to say you ain't heard of Nancy Brown's party? The DIA director wrote to Nancy and said, you've done more in a few weeks than we have been able to do in years. Now the Detroit News editors know Nancy Brown is on the map. She's more than just a columnist. She can say, let's throw a party and 100,000 people show up at the DIA. Powerful lady. One of her readers suggested, what about a sunrise service out on Belle Isle? And Nancy thought, that's a pretty good idea. I don't know how many people are going to get up that early and drive out to Belle Isle for a sunrise service, but yeah. And so in 1934, they decided they would have a sunrise service out on Belle Isle. Well, the first time, 30,000 people showed up. The next year, 50,000 people showed up. And she had a range of speakers. By now, they had actually had a column chaplain. His name was Dr. Edgar DeWitt Jones. So he spoke. Also at the sunrise service, Rabbi Leon Fram of Temple Beth El spoke. Dr. Warren Pickett of the First Congregational Church spoke. And so did Reverend Wayland Zwayer of the Jefferson Avenue Baptist. So people were willing to get in their cars, and as we know, there weren't freeways in those days. So they got in their cars at who knows how early you'd have to get up to go out for the sunrise service. Again, Nancy Brown could pull them in. Well, let's look at the hidden story of the Carillon. The Carillon was the reader's idea. This was not something Nancy thought of. Now we're in the Depression. 60,000 readers would donate small amounts because in the Depression, people were counting pennies. I know during the Depression, my great-grandmother took in boarders. I mean, you did what you had to do. And the Carillon, as I told you, cost $59,000. How did they raise the money? Amazing. All the readers, this is all readers. They had bake sales. They put on a concert at the Detroit Institute of Musical Art. They had card parties and would charge people to come play cards. They had a picnic at Pablo. They sold cookbooks. Column Night sent their recipes in. They were bound in a book and then they sold the cookbooks. They had home parties. This is an interesting one, city gas refunds. The gas company realized they'd overcharged their customers. So they said, what we'll do is we'll send a refund check to all of you for what we overcharged. Well, the Column Night said, well, wait a minute, you didn't even miss this money. why don't you donate the refund check to the Carillon? And many people did. So they got the refund checks from the gas company. They put a donation box in the Majestic building lobby so people could, on their way home from work or going to work, could put money in the box. They even had a radio party at WWJ Radio. And through all these methods, they raised in the Depression $59,000. And that's what paid for the Carillon. It was not paid for by the city or the state. It was her readers that put it up. Amazing. So the day came, it was time to do a dedication. So again, 100,000 people show up for the Carillon dedication.
I apologize. I didn't-
There, on the Carillon is a plaque, and it says dedicated to peace in honor of Nancy Brown, built by her readers. Again, readers built this, of her experience column in the Detroit News. That's the cornerstone. And the building was started in 1939, which is why that date is there. So on this day, they revealed the Carillon. But for 21 years, no one had seen Nancy Brown. They don't know what she looked like. They have no idea. So not just the Carillon was revealed that day, but so was Nancy Brown, because she had the shovel and she made the first dig. There's Nancy Brown. Aw, she looks like a sweet little old lady. Remember the remark I told you she made to this? She was not a sweet little old lady. There was a rumor, I don't know, I didn't check into it deeply enough, but there was a rumor. She could be a tough customer back at the Detroit News building too. You didn't want to cross Nancy too often. But she gave a speech that day, and she said, and she thanked her fans, with whom she said, we had gone shoulder to shoulder down the road of life. So that's what brought up the Carillon. That one person, a columnist for the Detroit News, but she filled that void. People were so lonely and had so few options to reach out and connect. And she filled that. Of course, later you had Dear Abby and Ann Landers, but by then phones were, and you know, they had more ways to do it. But you can see the power she wielded. So what became of Nancy Brown? Well, she retired in 1942, and 6 years later, at the age of 77, she died, and she is interred at Oakview Cemetery in Royal Oak. Let me explain the name. If her name is Nancy Brown, why does it say Brown Leslie? She was born Annie Brown. When she got the job as the experienced columnist, she didn't want to be Annie Brown. She thought the name Nancy sounded more sophisticated. So she became Nancy Brown. But she was also married, and her last name was Leslie. She was married to Mr. Leslie. So on her stone, it says Brown because that's where her fame came from, but she was also Mrs. Leslie. So that's why the name Leslie is on the stone as well. Amazing how much power she had. Can you imagine saying, let's have a party at the DIA and 100,000 people show up? They were floored. They were floored. Well, again, you're not going to look at the Carillon the same way either. That was Depression dollars that built that. Now we're going to look at the man Detroiters hated, and I'm not being facetious. They hated him. I will show you why they hated him. Let's look at the William F. Scott Memorial Fountain. It's common knowledge the fountain is really the jewel of Belle Isle. It's just beautiful. Well, William F. Scott is the man the fountain is named after. You're going to learn a lot about him, but let me tell you about the fountain. The architect was Cass Gilbert. Cass Gilbert also designed the Detroit Public Library, and he also designed the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. This fountain, if you've ever been to it and walked on it. It's huge. It's 10 tons of Vermont marble. It has a 510-foot circumference. Remember this is important. The central fountain sprays 125 feet into the air. This is going to come into play later, okay? All righty. So who exactly was James F. Scott? Well, he was a millionaire playboy. He was born in 1831 in Detroit. He never worked a day in his life. He was born rich, and that's the way it stayed. He was considered a loafer and a gambler. He told off-colored jokes that offended everyone. And he was known as a womanizing scoundrel. And I would gladly list his positive traits had he had any, but he didn't. That's the best you can say about him. Here's the biggie. He didn't like to lose at all, no matter what.
Was he educated?
Yeah. Educated as rich sons were at that time. You know, they would have tutors, and yes, he was educated. He decided he wanted to build a mansion at the corner of Peterborough and Park in Detroit. And he wanted a magnificent mansion. And this is a view of the front of it, but they called this house the Spite House. The Spite.
S-P-I-T-E.
They called it the Spite House. Remember, I told you he doesn't like to lose. He wanted to build a huge mansion on Peterborough at the corner of Park. Here's a picture of the mansion. And I want you to notice the width. It's not very wide. He wanted to buy the lot behind his so he could build an expansive mansion. The man that lived back there didn't want to sell. And James F. Scott wanted to buy that land, and the man wouldn't sell, which meant he didn't get his way. So he built this. It is 3 stories, 20,000 square feet. He never planned to live in it. It was never built so he could live in it because he didn't get the lot behind it. It's called the Spite House because he told the man behind him, I'm going to see that you never see another sunrise. I'm going to see that your view is ugly for all time. And that's what I'm going to do. This is the front of the mansion. Let me show you the back that the neighbor got to see. You can see why now the house isn't too wide. No windows, no nothing. Scott was never going to live in this house. He put it up to spite the man that wouldn't sell him the land. He didn't, just to be, and it is, well, some people call this Scott's folly, but most people refer to this as the Spite House. Later, if we have time, I'll show you what it looks like today. Okay, remind me. But now you know James F. Scott, not a fun guy. Okay. James F. Scott died in 1910. He bequeathed $200,000 to the city of Detroit for a Belle Isle monument, and it had to include a statue of him. Apparently he loved Belle Isle. Well, so he leaves 200,000. That's, what is that, like $9 million today? Who knows? Well, to give you an idea how popular he was. This is what the city fathers had to say about him. Now, they got his 200,000. This is what they had to say. J.L. Hudson, yes, that J.L. Hudson. J.L. Hudson said he never did anything for Detroit in his lifetime. Bishop Charles Williams said only a good man should be honored. One minister, this is a minister, a minister at the town meeting said, well, we could build him a monument, maybe about that high, you know, just a couple inches high. And they said, no, that won't float. So what did they do? They did what government always does. They sat on it for 11 years. They didn't do anything. But they put the money in an interest-bearing account, so it kept growing. Well, eventually, you got to do the right thing. The man left the money. Now the 200,000 has grown to 500,000. So,
In 11 years?
yeah, these are rich people. J.L. Hudson and them, they know how to invest. So the city finally had to act on F. Scott's bequeath. They didn't want to. Okay, so they're up to 500,000. Well, okay, I told you at the beginning, Belle Isle is 982 acres large, right? Well, it isn't. That's not true. It is today. Back then, it was 782 acres. Now, the city hired Cass Gilbert to build this fountain. Well, Cass Gilbert wanted to build a fountain on the level of European grand fountains with lagoons and landscaping and promenades, but there wasn't room. There's the Scott Fountain. And as you can see, there is a lagoon and there is landscaping and there is a promenade, a walking area. How did he do it? Well, first off, when this was going to start, this project began, this whole area did not exist. That wasn't part of Belle Isle. So you have Cass Gilbert wants to build this grand fountain with the grounds and everything, but there's no ground. But things happen and you can connect the dots. 1921, money was flowing, people were making money, cars were rolling off the assembly line, and Detroit was building skyscrapers. What's the first thing you do when you build a building? You dig a big hole. Well, the people building downtown Detroit said, we've got all this dirt, we don't know what to do with. Cass Gilbert said, I'm putting a fountain up on Belle Isle and I sure could use some dirt. The soil from downtown Detroit was trucked over to Belle Isle and created 200 extra acres so Cass Gilbert could have his lagoon and his landscaping. I've got pictures to show you of how they did it. I am not a mechanical engineer. Don't ask really technical questions, but I'll show you what I know. Okay. First, they had to build a platform, and the fountain had to sit on top of the platform because all the mechanisms that create the water and the fountains and whatever are underneath. You know, when you go to the Scott Fountain today, you don't see the workings of it. They're underneath. So first they built a platform. The fountain goes on top. The mechanical works go underneath, and look at the water. You know, they stop the flow of the Detroit River on the one side, and they're adding dirt and so forth. Here's another picture where you can see the platform's a little more completed. The fountain is still being built. You can see the cranes or whatever they're working on there. It's going up. There's still water. Again, here's a view from underneath the platform. and water. The mechanical works are still there underneath the fountain, and the workers can go in and make adjustments or do whatever. So finally, the fountain's complete, the platform and the mechanical works are complete. Now you have to bring the dirt to cover them all up and level it. Here you see people are leveling the land. You don't see the platform anymore. Now you only see the fountain, but you can see them leveling and getting things ready. You're not seeing so much water now. So they're putting in and adding acreage to Belle Isle. If you were to stand at the top of the fountain and look towards Detroit, this is what you would see. It's not what you would see today, but that whole section was created by using soil from downtown Detroit, the skyscrapers, and enlarging Belle Isle to accommodate the lagoon and the landscaping and all that. So when you go out and see the fountain, I know I certainly had no idea. First off, I never thought about the mechanical works. I didn't know where they were, didn't care. But now to learn that Belle Isle is now 982 acres, but back then it was 782. They added 200 acres from the soil of Detroit. That's a lot of dirt. So let's look at the fountain. There are 109 water outlets. They've got lions and horns. They have turtles. They have quite a few Neptune figures. I don't know if you've ever paid attention to the band that goes around the fountain. It's fascinating. There are 16 bas relief tiles here depicting the early life of Detroit. That's the whole history of Detroit on that band. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So Cass Gilbert got his way. He got the grand fountain with the lagoons and
Where's the statue? It's supposed to contain the statue of him.
Do you know? Yeah, they should have. Oh wait, I'm going to show you. Okay, so there's the fountain. Now here's the statue of James F. Scott. Apparently he loved Belle Isle, and the city fathers built this monument with his statue. And look at the scenery behind him. That's Belle Isle behind him. He's looking at the statue, and in the distance, he's looking at Detroit. That's an insult. He loved Belle Isle. He thought they were going to make a statue where he faced Belle Isle. No. His back is to Belle Isle. But that wasn't the big insult. That wasn't the big insult. Do you remember I told you the main fountain, or the main water on the fountain shoots 125 feet into the air? Well, when there's a good wind, he gets spritzed in the face. That wasn't an accident. They knew that. They knew that. So I think that's part of the reason, the old cliche about don't fight City Hall. They always get the last word. So when the wind is blowing, good old James gets it right in the kisser.
He's all wet.
Yeah. So apparently he was not a popular man. Today, he is interred at Grand Lawn Cemetery in Detroit. And again, a grand, not a mausoleum, but a grand resting place for James L. Scott. So these are 3 of the hidden stories on Belle Isle. There are many, many more, but these were the 3 that captured my attention the most, because everyone knows them. Everyone knows the soldier on the horse. They know the Caroline. They certainly know the fountain, but people often don't know the story behind them.
Yeah.
And fascinating. Now, I said I would tell you what the Spite House looks like today. If it was ignored for years and years and years, it was one of those dilapidated, horrible places. Where's that? Let me get past this. It's amazing. The house was bought, was purchased. That's what it looked like at one time. I mean, that's pretty sad. But they bought it. They bought it. And that's what it looks like today. So they refurbished the front of it. But as you know, the problem wasn't really the front. The problem was the back. They put apartments in there. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Real, and again, they're small because this house isn't that wide. And now this is what it looks like. So they've taken something and made it good again. And the apartments inside look lovely, and they've added windows to the back and balconies. And so I can't remember the name of the man that bought the Spite House, but he's turned it around. So this is a lot nicer than maybe just tearing it down and doing whatever. There are other stories on Belle Isle. I think I have a slide showing them. Okay, what's a German philosopher and the father of Italian literature doing on Belle Isle? I'm not going to tell you, by the way. I'm just raising questions. What's the connection between the aquarium and the police station during Prohibition?
Well, had alcohol.
All right, I'll tell you that one.
Yeah,
They used to bring alcohol across from Windsor, from Canada.
Yeah, he was always.
Well, sometimes, if you've been there, the aquarium's not very large. And they had a speakeasy in the basement. There's a set of stairs on the side, and that's how you got into the speakeasy. But they would bring cartons of booze over, and they didn't have space for them. So they stored the extra booze at the police station. And nobody squealed. The police turned a blind eye, you know? Okay, why was Belle Isle called Belgium during World War II? The Marines were preparing for a water landing. Well, you have to practice. You don't want to wait till the real thing. They used Belle Isle. So Marines would storm Belle Isle from the water to get training. And the Marines referred to it as Belgium. Who was Big Pete and what happened to him? Another spoiler alert you don't want to know. What's Houdini's connection to Belle Isle? Houdini pulled off one of his magic stunts on the bridge.
Jumped off it.
He did. He jumped off it, tied up, he survived, and it was a publicity stunt, but it worked. It worked. Okay, what does Tarzan have to do with Belle Isle? Anybody? Anybody know?
Maybe they made one of his movies.
Who?
Maybe one of his movies.
You're close. In the 40s, 50s, Johnny Weissmuller played Tarzan. Well, prior to going to Hollywood, he was a swimmer at the Olympics, and he trained at the Belle Isle Swim Club. So that's what Tarzan has to do with Belle Isle. Okay, one last one. I'll ask you a question. It's not on the board. Heidi knows, so she can't say. What rock and roll star learned to drive on Belle Isle? Who?
She said Diana Ross.
Diana Ross, no. No. Who else? Elvis? No.
Jack White.
No, Jack White, no. Nope. A famous rock and roller learned to drive on Belle Isle.
Bob Seger.
Nope, not Bob Seger.
Kid Rock.
Not Kid Rock.
Stevie Wonder.
Who? Who did she say? Okay, I'm going to tell you. The rock and roller who learned to drive on Belle Isle was Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones.
No way.
In the 1970s, the Rolling Stones were performing in Detroit. And as you know, they have people in every city to help them and get them around, do whatever. And Mick Jagger made the comment to this woman who was supposed to get him from point A to point B. I've always wanted to learn to drive an American car where the steering column's on the left. And she said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll go out to Belle Isle Sunday morning early. There won't be a lot of people there. And I'll teach you to drive an American car. And she took him out there and he learned to drive on Belle Isle. Mick Jagger was the right answer. Okay, well, I hope when you go back to Belle Isle, you'll look at it with fresh eyes. There's a lot going on there. And I'm guilty of it myself. I've been to Belle Isle and I miss so many amazing stories. But now you've got an idea of some of the stories that are going on out there.
When did they build the bridge?
This is the third bridge. This is the MacArthur Bridge. There was a wooden bridge. It burned. Then there was what's called a swing bridge. You know, they swing it so boats can go through or whatever. Well, in the 20s, 30s, they used to have dances out at the Belle Isle Casino. Well, the rule was you got to be off the island by midnight or your reputation was ruined. Well, that meant you had to be on the bridge by 11 because once the bridge swung open, you were stranded. Many a reputation was spoiled. So yeah, most people don't know it's called the MacArthur Bridge today, but everybody says the Belle Isle Bridge, so we know that. That was built, I don't know the exact year, I don't know. But yeah, the MacArthur Bridge is the one now.
They used to go canoeing and ice skating, and they had the casino there, and Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yeah.
Mom said she paid $2 to go see Frank.
Absolutely, they used to get first class entertainers out there at the band shell, and there was ice skating. And do you know at the height, maybe in the 1920s, you could rent canoes. And do you know at one point there were 20,000 canoes on Belle Isle? I don't think there was room. You could fall off, you wouldn't drown, you just land in another canoe.
Yeah.
You know, very popular and has been for years and years and years. In the early part of the 1900s, people only had one day off a week, Sunday. And if you worked in a factory, and many, many people did, you craved a chance to be out in nature. And that was the whole point of Belle Isle, that people who worked in the city with the pollution or in factories could go and enjoy nature for one day a week. And they certainly did. They had trolley cars go down there and stop right at the edge of the bridge. And do you remember they used to have that stove at the foot of at the entrance to Belle Isle, that great big stove? Yeah, it burned. It did, truly, it burned to the ground. Yeah, Belle Isle has been around for many, many years. And if you look at the old postcards, you see the women in their long dresses. And so it served a lot of purposes.
Can you do this again with my story?
Could I do it again with more stories? Well, I can't bring up the Mick Jagger question again. Yeah, there are. Isn't it fascinating? And I'm always intrigued that I can go someplace and I have a terrible, terrible habit. I research it when I get home, totally wrong. But I'll think that was so interesting. And I get home and I read the book and I think, I didn't know that. And I walked right by that. I didn't know why it was important. So yeah, I would love to do it. And there are so many stories about Belle Isle. And I never bring up Belle Isle that people don't share their stories with me. I did a bus tour the one time, and the lady that got off easily in her 80s, and she said, Sherry, I've been coming to Belle Isle since I was 5 years old. There's nothing you can tell me about Belle Isle. And on the way home, she came up and she said, I didn't know any of that. Well, neither did I until I started researching it, and it's fascinating. I think the more you understand what happened there and why, it becomes even more interesting. I know you'll never look at that Carillon again. That people in the Depression thought so much of Nancy Brown. They scrimped and saved and had all those activities to raise money. and saying, I'm gonna have a party, join me at the DIA, and 100,000 people show up. Wow, and the beauty of the fountain, and that's all due to James F. Scott, yuck.
They thought they were going to reveal who she was and what she looked like at that invitation.
Yeah.
But we thought we were gonna get to see her finally.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, there's a good news, bad news. The good news, because they didn't know what she looked like, she could wander around among them and hear all their comments, and they felt safe trading secrets. But then after 21 years of anonymity, can you really live up to the billing? I mean, really? I don't know what they thought. I mean, she looks like a sweet little old lady, but she could be quite acerbic in the column. She didn't pull her punches, I can tell you that much. But I think it's a testament to how much loneliness there was that she could generate that kind of power. Amazing. Maybe that's why Twitter and Facebook are so popular today. We have more than one outlet. People back then didn't, but there was a need for it, obviously. So, any other questions?
Where did Scott get his wealth?
His father, they were from Detroit. His father was a real estate magnate. And from what I can understand, his father was an honest man, highly respected. He made his fortune in Detroit real estate. But James F. Scott, there was one person who said something nice about him. Isn't that sad? One person. He was a bachelor all his life. He never married. And he lived in this boarding house. It had to be very upscale. And the lady that owned it, she said, well, Mr. Scott's really a very nice man. And when I read that, I thought she enjoyed getting that rent check every month. I mean, she wasn't going to jeopardize that. So I don't know how much credence I would put in that. The only comment I could find that was positive was from his landlady. Yikes. Not good. He loved to play cards, but boy, if he lost, you have no idea. He owned a building next to a butcher, and every time the butcher made a sale, they rang a bell. Well, that annoyed him. He didn't want it. He told them, stop ringing that bell, and they said no. And he bought the building on the other side of them, had a great big statue of a pig, and put it on the block. It was on Woodward. It was there for 4 years, and it was to embarrass the butcher.
Oh.
Yeah, I tried to find a picture of the pig, but I could not. I thought if it was on Woodward for 4 years, somebody had to have taken a picture, but I couldn't find. But he did it because they wouldn't stop ringing the bell. That's how mean he was. So anyway, that's it, guys. Thank you very much.